Living the Science of Mind, page 64, the New Thought Movement. The New Thought Movement is essentially spiritual. Dealing with the laws of mind, it is also scientific. It assumes that God is not only the final reality, it is the only present reality. Everything that is real is of it. Our own being is God manifest as personality. The New Thought movement has been likened to applied Christianity. It is both unique and practical, since it seeks to make definite use of spiritual power in everyday living. This attempt to reevaluate the philosophy of Christianity in terms of practical application definitely originated in the New Thought movement and became its chief impulsion, its outstanding characteristic. It is this practical application of spiritual causation to human needs which has drawn the attention of millions of people in America and other millions throughout the world to a new outlook on life and to a new hope. Whatever the New Thought movement may owe to other systems, and it owes much, it is unique in this. It has placed a new and dynamic meaning on the relationship between God and humanity, between the invisible and the visible. With Jesus, it has insisted that faith shall be made manifest in works, that the creative power of God is individualized in every soul. Spiritual faith, belief, and conviction are not merely terms used to designate the devotional life. They are dynamic and creative instruments to be used in everyday living. While there is a wide range of opinion among the New Thought leaders, teachers, practitioners, and laymen, this one underlying purpose runs through the entire movement: the immediate availability of good, conscious and practical application of spiritual thought force to the solution of human problems, the inevitable necessity that good shall come to every soul, the belief in immortality and the continuity of the individual stream of consciousness, and eternal expansion of the individual life, the awakening not to an absorption of one's identity in deity, but to their complete unity with the whole. Thus, every person becomes an individualized center of God consciousness, eternally expanding. The New Thought movement is metaphysical, but not in a strictly philosophical sense. Metaphysics in terms of New Thought means a practical idealism, which emphasizes spiritual causation and the accessibility of spiritual mind's power, acting in accord with law and available to all people. From this standpoint, Christian metaphysics means the philosophy of the New Testament practiced as a science. It is the purpose of the New Thought movement to prove the teachings of Jesus relative to the spiritual universe and humanity's relationship to it. The New Thought movement, in many ways, is unlike most of the Eastern teachings, for in following the philosophy of Jesus more closely than that of other teachers of antiquity, it emphasizes the importance of individualism. In this, it is quite American, which is natural, since the movement started here. Yet, it would be a mistake to deny the heritage which this movement has received from many sources. It is an outgrowth of all that has gone before. It has borrowed much from the idealistic philosophies of the ages, particularly Plato, Socrates, and the Neoplatonists. It has been profoundly influenced by the teachings of the Old Testament, the precepts of Buddha, and the sacred writings of the East. It owes an enormous debt of gratitude to many of the spiritual philosophies of the Middle Ages, and in our own country is particularly indebted to Emerson and many others whose writings we are all familiar. But as much as it is owed to other systems of thought, it is still a unique American institution in that it started in this country, and although it has spread all over the world, it has flourished and grown here more than elsewhere. It probably would be safe to estimate that from 15 to 20 million people in America today are influenced by its teachings. The movement itself is the outcome of a number of contemporaneous systems of thought which has emphasized the inner life. As Dresser stated in his History of the New Thought movement, the last century witnessed the rediscovery of the inner life. The New Age bids us go to the sources for ourselves. Probably more than on the work of any other one person, the New Thought movement of America has been built upon the teachings of Phineas Quimby, who was born in New Hampshire in 1802 and who passed from this plane in the state of Maine in 1866. This man was one of the few original thinkers of the ages. He had a deep intuition as well as an unusually pronounced psychic development. He believed that we are living in a spiritual universe now, but that the freedom of our choice, backed by the law of mind, makes possible the experience of discord and limitation. He said, "Can a theory be found capable of practice which can separate truth from error? I undertake to say there is a method of reasoning which, being understood, can separate one from the other. People are made up of truth and belief. And if we are deceived into a belief that we have, or are liable to have, a disease, the belief is catching and the effect follows it." Quimby laid his chief emphasis on spiritual mind healing rather than on the control of conditions through the creative power of thought. He claims that disease is but a dream from which one may be awakened. His method, according to his son George Quimby, was to change the mind of a patient and disabuse it of its error and establish the truth in its place, which, if done, was the cure. He was completely convinced that the creative spirit within us is God, and that we have an immediate relationship to the divine. This relationship is creative. Quimby never sought to control others. He made no suggestions to them. That is, he did not practice suggestive therapeutics. His whole method of procedure was spiritual explanation. His whole idea was that symptoms would disappear with the changed viewpoint. In this, he anticipated that discoveries of modern psychology, except that his was a more spiritual method. He spoke of mind as spiritual substance and often referred to what he called the real or the spiritual person who needed to be summoned to the aid of the person who is mentally and physically sick. Quimby believed in a spiritual body. He taught that there is no disease independent of mind. Thus, he said, disease being in its root a wrong belief, change the belief and it will cure the disease. By faith, we are thus made whole. The New Thought movement in America today owes much to this man's life, teaching, and practice. Most of its early teachers were instructed by him. Thus, we find most of them emphasizing the divine spark in humanity, which, despite all appearances to the contrary, is always there. Shortly after Quimby passed in 1866, several of his devout students, most of whom he had healed, began to teach and write. Each branched out freely and naturally. Each added their own ideas to what they had received from Quimby. Among those early teachers were people who had already been theologically trained, several of them in the Swedenborgian church, and it was not difficult for them to follow Quimby since they had already been taught to believe in a law of spiritual correspondences. Whatever the difference of opinion among these early teachers may have been, they all seem unanimous in emphasizing mental and spiritual causation and the thought that the material universe possesses no independent life and intelligence. Of course, this was before the day of the new physics. They all taught that spiritual mind healing of the physical body is a result of touching the springs of life in the soul of the patient. Naturally, the different teachers chose different names, such as divine science, metaphysical clubs, applied Christianity, practical Christianity, and innumerable other things. And in England, the term higher thought was used, all of which have a common meaning. The New Thought movement has always been very individualistic and, in many respects, has stood for a protest against ecclesiastical or spiritual authority. Finally, an attempt was made to weld the whole movement into a national alliance for the purpose of clarity of thought and the dissemination of its teaching. The following declaration of purpose is taken from one of its earliest records. Organized to promote an active interest in a more spiritual philosophy and its practical application to human life. Its spirit is broad, tolerant, and constructive, and its object an impartial search for truth. All who sympathize with these purposes, without regard to past or present affiliations of sect, party, or system, are cordially invited to cooperate. In another statement drawn at an early date, we read, "It seeks the spark of infinitude in the seemingly finite, and seeks to fan it into a blaze that shall be the light of the world. It is therefore striving to bring into hearty cooperation all the individual potencies that have tended toward the high end which it has in view, believing that thus a resistless impulse might be given to the development of life on the highest attainable plane." It was the purpose of the New Thought movement not only to stand for a method of spiritual healing, but for a positive and affirmative philosophic idealism of religion, of applied Christianity, and to emphasize the rediscovery of the gospel teachings relative to healing and everyday life.